So it is a huge honor to be here today for a couple of reasons. Obviously, we've seen some amazing ideas, some amazing analysis of risk that potentially threatens us, and some amazing descriptions of opportunities and ways that we can get involved. So these types of ideas are very inspiring. But this is not like any other TEDx event. This is actually a very special TED event. And in particular, it's not as special because of the venerable name on this half of the placard, but really because of the venerable name on this half of the placard. So we're coming to you live from the center of New York City on the urban campus of New York University, where some of the most amazing ideas and amazing people are doing great work every day to help solve some of the world's problems. So I'd like to start with two thank yous. And the first one is to New York University for inspiring so many people to do so much good, and in addition for helping us learn as a community. So can I get a huge round of applause for New York University? And the second one, as you can tell, this is incredibly well put together and a professional event. I mean, you could pay thousands of dollars to come to this event if speakers like myself were a little bit better at speaking. But the professionalism of this event is put together by months of hard work by a lot of people behind the scenes. So I'd also like to give a huge round of applause to the organizers who've just done an amazing job. Okay? So what I'd like to talk to you about today is influence. And in fact, we've just seen two examples of influence in this room. Okay? The probability that the room would have erupted in two massive cheers and rounds of applause, even before I gave you one word of substance, is next to zero, okay? But with a little encouragement from me, you guys have chosen to clap for people who deserve to be honored. And what I'd like to talk to you today is about influence like this, but not just influence in a room like this, but influence in social networks, from person to person to person. And not just in social networks, but in digital social networks and social media networks. Because I feel like this is one area or one method or one channel through which we can achieve great social change that we couldn't have achieved just a few years ago. Okay? So this is obviously big news. For instance, Facebook, right? It's going to IPO in the spring for hundreds of billions of dollars, right? And one of the main promises of Facebook is something called social commerce. And this is a UK Wired News cover story. And at the bottom it says, "Commerce gets social, how your networks are driving what you buy." Okay, so how is it that when you like a product, what does that do to the level of consumer demand for that product amongst your friends, but amongst other people as well? And it's not just about commerce. For instance, how do revolutions happen that are encouraged or propagated through messages sent on social media like Facebook? And when I was thinking about, how can I really drive this point home? What kind of imagery could I use? I thought about this guy, Ashton Kutcher. Some of you may know this, and I was looking for an image of Ashton Kutcher on the web, and I found this one, and I was thinking, yes, like Ashton Kutcher is the poster boy for social influence and digital media networks. Everybody knows he's at A+K on Twitter, and he's got a lot of followers. And when I found this image, I realized that he's actually the poster boy for influence in social media networks, because this is a poster with his face on it that says influence in big block letters at the bottom, and the caption says, "Behind every great man is 3,953,895 followers." Okay? Which is very much out of date. He has a lot more followers now, but it says something specific about how we are conceptualizing influence in this poster. So with a show of hands, let me see your hands raised high if you know who Ashton Kutcher is and you've seen him talk or movies, etc. Okay, that's pretty much everybody in the room. Okay, so put your hands down. Now let me see another show of hands if you have ever done anything that Ashton Kutcher has told you to do. Okay, that's nobody. So it begs the question, what is influence? Does Ashton Kutcher really have a lot of influence? He clearly has a big microphone, okay? But does he have a lot of influence? So that inspires a different definition that I've sort of tried to promote in the literature, which is how the behaviors of one's peers change the likelihood or the extent to which one engages in a certain behavior. So this is not about tweeting a lot, but it's about behavior change, just like we saw behavior change at the beginning of this talk with the applause in the room. And it's not just about behavior change, it's about how behaviors spread from one person to another person to another person. And I study this because I believe that if we can understand how behaviors spread in a social network and thus in a population from person to person to person to person, then we can potentially promote behaviors like these, condom use or tolerance or exercise. And we can potentially contain behaviors like these, smoking or dirty needle sharing or fraud, violence. So I mine massive social network data to understand how individuals influence each other to do everything from buy a different product, vote for a different political candidate, or change their behavior, quit smoking, take up a new exercise routine. And the key to all of this research is causal inference. So I have this cartoon on my door in my office. Any of the students out there who've been to my office know this. And it's two friends talking, and one friend says to the other, I used to think correlation implied causation, then I took a statistics class and now I don't. And the friend says, it sounds like the class helped, and the guy goes, well, maybe. And the idea is that, well, maybe the class is teaching him about statistics, or maybe this guy has an interest in statistics, and thus a proclivity to understand statistics, and he selects into the statistics class, and that correlation isn't about the class teaching him about statistics, but it's more selecting people who would know this difference, okay? And that in network science is known as the reflection problem. So by now we have lots of empirical evidence that human behaviors tend to cluster in network space and in time. Friends tend to do the same things and tend to do those things at approximately the same time. But the question is this because of peer-to-peer influence or alternative explanations? And let me give you an example. So there was this great study in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2007, which showed, it was by Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler. It was a great study that showed that body mass index increases are correlated over time amongst friends. Okay? And the news media and the collective unconscious picked up this result, and you got front page New York Times Magazine articles like this one that said, are your friends making you fat? Okay? Which is a very causal statement. Okay? In this case, your friends are making you fat. But there are alternative explanations for this same correlation in the data. For instance, homophily. Okay? And all homophily means is just that birds of a feather tend to flock together. We tend to make friends with people who are like ourselves, and if that's true, this process can explain those correlations as well. So for instance, maybe marathon runners tend to be friends, and people who like the all-you-can-eat buffet line at Denny's tend to be friends, and so you get pockets of obesity and pockets of non-obesity in the network that aren't about causal peer-to-peer influence. Okay? And this is a very old theory, homophily. So this was originally attributed to this man here, Robert Burton, in the 1500s. But even before Robert Burton, it was Aristotle who was saying that people love those who are like themselves. And even before Aristotle, it was Plato who said that similarity begets friendship. And just to prove to you that a long line of worthy scholars have made this argument, it was my mom who said, hanging out with a bad crowd will get you into trouble. She was none too pleased when I quipped at the dinner table that she might have gotten the causal structure of that sentence wrong. So Slate ran an article that was called Everything is Contagious, which was ironically about academics like myself, that there was a contagion amongst academics to publish studies about contagion. So apparently it's not just obesity, but happiness is contagious, and product adoption is contagious, and cooperation is contagious, and my favorite one, loneliness is contagious, which I'm still trying to figure out. But the point is that there could be alternative explanations. So we've talked about reflection and homophily, but also confounding factors. So we make friends with those people at work or people that we live near, and maybe our work creates a new health incentive to go to the gym to lower their healthcare costs, or maybe a new restaurant opens in our neighborhood, and these are confounding factors. Now, separating influence from these confounding factors in data is really important for two reasons, because the causal structure of the spread of a behavior through a social social network implies different diffusion properties for the behavior. Where is it going to go next? So who should we target? And different optimal containment and promotion policies, incentive systems designed to encourage people to spread the behavior or curtail the behavior. So we did a study with Yahoo where we studied 30 million people exchanging instant messages dynamically over a 6-month period. And they launched a new product and they wanted to know, well, are friends encouraging their friends to adopt this product? So we devised a new statistical technique and we separated it out, and what we found was that if we had used the naive estimates that don't control for homophily and confounding, that we would have overestimated influence by 700%, and that we would have that really 50% of what we thought was influence was just observable homophily, correlated preferences amongst friends. Okay? And so I tell this result to my friends, and I'm like, 700%, 50%, and they go, wow, Sinan, you are a huge nerd. Like, who cares about that? This is so scientific. And I say, well, you should care about that because these types of data analysis help you understand which policy is going to be successful at curtailing this behavior or promoting it. So let me give you an example. If you were a business and I gave you a data set and I said, look, here's a data set of all your consumers. They are adopting the products together. Friends are adopting the products together. And in scenario A, I told you that 90% of this correlation was because of influence and 10% was because of homophily. And in scenario B, I told you that 90% was because of homophily and 10% was because of influence. In the first case, you'd want to adopt a peer-to-peer strategy. You'd want to give people incentives to encourage their friends to adopt the product. But in the second scenario, that strategy might be much less likely to work, and you might want to just segment the population based on observable demographic characteristics and target people who your predictive models say are likely to purchase the product. Now, those people are going to be connected because their preferences are correlated, but the influence mechanism may not be working in the second case. So this is what the probability of adoption amongst friends looked like in that data with the naive estimates. So in the first week, if you adopted within the first week, you were 6 times more. If you had friends who adopted, you were 16 times more likely to adopt the product early on in the first couple of weeks. And when we did the estimates controlling for confounding and homophily, this is the result that we got for influence, controlling for confounding and homophily. So what you notice is, first, much of the influence is really observable homophily, but also that at the beginning, it looks like there's a lot of influence at the beginning, and then it tapers off near the end of the product life cycle. Now, if you were a marketer and you saw that, you might think to yourself, well, I want peer-to-peer methods early on in the product life cycle, and then market segmentation later on in the market cycle. And if you thought that, you would be wrong. Because, in fact, influence is really constant throughout this process. And the question is, well, why is this the case? Why do we have this massive overestimate at the beginning, but not at the end? And you can think of that as the iPad effect. And what does that mean? Well, it means that people who adopt the product early, there's exaggerated homophily amongst those early adopters. People who adopt the product early are more like their other adopter friends than they are like their other non-adopter friends, and people who adopt it 6 months or a year after are just as much like their adopter friends as they are their non-adopter friends. Okay? What this means in sort of less complex terms is that people waiting in line for the iPad are more like their friends who are waiting in line for the iPad with them than they are like their other friends. And people who adopt the iPad a year out are just as much like their other iPod adopting friends as they are their non-iPod adopting friends. There's exaggerated homophily amongst the people who are willing to do that to get an iPod when it first comes out. Okay? So we liked that study. That was nice, but there were 2 problems with it. First, we had no control over the product, and second, it was observational data. So we ran an experiment inside Facebook amongst millions of people and asked the question, can we engineer the products so they're more likely to be virally shared from the beginning? And so we tested 2 types of features. The first is personal invitations, and the second was passive awareness. So just to bring this home, you can think of personal invitations as if I gave you the opportunity to invite your friends to TEDxNYU next year. And you can think of passive awareness as if I gave you T-shirts that said you went to TEDxNYU, so anybody that you saw would be passively aware that you were attending this event and that maybe you liked it. What we found is something you might expect. The personal invitations were 3 times more effective per message. There was a greater likelihood of people coming to the behavior from the personal invitation than from the passive awareness. And yes, this nearly doubled the global diffusion of the product in the network. But it was the passive awareness campaign that had a much larger effect on global diffusion. Why? Because many more messages were sent. Many more people saw the t-shirt than they did receive an invitation from a friend. And even though the invitation was more effective, the other one had broader reach. We also studied how much this increased engagement, and we actually found that personal invitations increased engagement a great deal, while the passive awareness campaign did not. Why? Because those are specific friends that you invite to the product, and you want to share that experience with them, as opposed to somebody who adopts that you don't know that might have seen your t-shirt. Now, what this last result means is that there's a virtuous cycle between peer adoption and engagement in the process of social contagion through a social network and thus through a population. As I invite my friends to join me in the behavior, for instance, doing outreach to reduce the digital divide or something like that, then both of us or all of us become more engaged in the activity. As we become more engaged in the activity, we're more likely to invite more friends. As we invite more friends, all of us become more engaged in the activity, and this is actually the process of mobilization. And that virtuous cycle is really valuable for creating social change. And when I present this result, I can always find the marketers in the room because they start to lean forward in their seats. They see a free lunch here, right? But it's not just about marketing. It's not just about marketing. We're applying these exact same concepts to spread HIV testing in South Africa, to try and combat violence in South Side of Chicago and in Johannesburg, etc. So I want to leave you with one final study that we did, which was a randomized trial of susceptibility to influence on Facebook according to what your relationship status is. So single, in a relationship, engaged, married, or it's complicated. So single people were more susceptible to influence than people who did not report their relationship status on Facebook. People who were in a relationship were even more susceptible to peer influence than people who were single. People who were engaged were even more susceptible to peer influence than people who were in a relationship. And people who were married were not susceptible to peer influence at all, apparently. And if it was complicated, you were the most susceptible to peer influence. So my colleagues and I debate what is going on here, and if you'd like to debate that with me or talk about any of these results, I highly encourage you to come talk to me. But more importantly, I encourage you to tell your friends to come talk to me. Thank you very much.